Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, will the Minab school attack be a red line for the U.S. and Iran?
The UN and rights groups have condemned the attack and called for an independent investigation, meaning the killings in Minab could become a defining test of accountability in the conflict.
The U.S. is investigating, and President Trump has said he's willing to live with whatever the report shows. We explore what an Al Jazeera investigation reveals and how calls to hold the U.S. accountable for the strike on a children's school in Iran are growing from within. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. It's February 28th, the beginning of the school week in Iran. In Minab, a city in the south, students gathered at the Shajara Taiba primary school. In late morning, a missile struck. The roof collapsed, crushing students and teachers.
It was one of the earliest incidents of this war. It remains perhaps the most devastating. A school in the southern town of Minab destroyed on Saturday morning, their bodies pulled from the rubble, lined up in a morgue for agonized parents to identify.
The attack killed more than 170 people, most of them children. Mikhail Mirzoragi was one of them. He was in third grade. His mother took his photo before he left for school that day.
He said, "Brother, let's play. I'm Iran and you're America. Let's play with guns and tanks." They started playing together. He said, "See? Iran won. Brother, Iran won. I was Iran and I won. My son said Iran was the winner."
Multiple investigations have shown that what hit the school is likely to be a U.S.-manufactured Tomahawk cruise missile. How the U.S. came to launch that missile is still being reported, and a U.S. investigation is ongoing. Al Jazeera's digital investigations unit, Sanad, did its own analysis, digging into more than a decade of satellite imagery and recent videos. Their conclusion was two scenarios. Either the attack was carried out with, quote, grave negligence, or the strike was carried out deliberately and with prior knowledge to inflict maximum societal shock. I spoke with my guest today about what accountability for this attack could and should look like.
My name is Hoda Katebi. I am a writer, community organizer, and labor attorney.
Hoda, welcome back to The Take. It's been a while, but it's always good to have you on. As you know, there is an ongoing U.S. military investigation into the attack on the primary school in Minab. And this is what U.S. President Donald Trump had to say on March 9th.
I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
He's willing to live with it. So we're talking about an investigation into whether he and the government he leads caused the deaths of more than 170 people and why. What does that say about this approach to the war?
Yeah, I think Trump saying that he's willing to live with the results of the investigation, is blatantly not true. I think already enough members of the U.S. government have come out and admitted that it was the U.S. government who bombed the Minab school. There have already been independent investigations by the New York Times, BBC, that have concluded that this was a U.S. strike on a school in Iran that killed over 100 young people. So I don't think he's willing to live with the results. I also don't think that it really matters whether or not he lives with the results, because he just doesn't care about Iranian life. I think Donald Trump and the truth don't have a very close relationship to begin with. So whether or not he admits it or is willing to live with it doesn't change the fact that it was a missile produced in the United States that killed and continue to kill children all across Iran and have been killing kids in Gaza and Palestine and Lebanon and Yemen. And this is very part and parcel of the United States and Israel's war against our people across the global south and particularly across the Middle East. This is part of the game for them. There is no distinguishment between civilian and non-civilian. And this has been the very normalized new world order after Israel's genocide in Gaza remained unchecked.
Well, Hoda, you might know Al Jazeera just concluded its own investigation that revealed the attack was likely deliberate. And we're not the only ones who did an investigation. We're also not the only ones who reached the conclusion that the U.S. most likely targeted this location where the school now is. And what's behind that is still up for investigation as per the United States and the Pentagon. But for you, being that this was one of the first big mass casualty strikes of this war, a war that may or may not have been shocking for many people, what was your reaction when you heard about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously everything is still very raw and ongoing. All of my family, minus my immediate family, lives in Iran and live throughout the country. And so I think that this has been utterly devastating and really difficult to put into words. There is a clear lack of care, clear deliberation about an idea of just emotional devastation and a sort of emotional defeat of a community. And I think that that is a very real aspect of this, is that, and this is what we saw repeated again and again in Gaza, is that let's strike something that is really connected to people in a deep emotional way, children, hospitals, etc. And then we'll originally deny it. So while people are so focused on figuring out whether or not it was us, whether or not it was deliberate, we've already done it 10 other times. And so I think this is just the mental and emotional, psychological warfare that's happening, along with just the actual massive amount of casualties that have yet to even be counted in Iran, as well as across the region. That is, and this is the scale. This is the new world that we're inheriting right now, and it's utterly devastating. It isn't intended to be so.
Yeah. And basically what you're elucidating is that this is definitely not the first time the U.S. has been accused of hitting a civilian target. We know that in the so-called global war on terror, U.S. airstrikes resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians. So keeping that context in mind, I want to read you something from the Reuters news agency, who writes, if the U.S. fault is confirmed, it would rank among the worst incidents of civilian deaths in decades of U.S. military strikes in the Middle East. And this is about the strike on the elementary school. What does that mean for you? How do you make sense of that?
Yeah. I think it's a both and for me. I think that this is, like we've discussed, not a new part of U.S. foreign policy. Even with these targeted drone strikes that Obama carried out and prior presidents have killed scores of civilians at weddings. In every sorts of scenario, there's been deliberate targeting of civilians. And so I think that as a concept is not new. The scale and sort of wanton, reckless bloodlust that I think we're seeing both clearly happening in terms of these deliberation of targets and the types of targets that are being hit, and also the comments by people like Hexeth Trump, who says it's an honor to be killing Iranians. There's a level of just articulated bloodlust that I think this administration has really espoused, that I think is very new. We, as Iranians, don't even have the honor of a justification for this war. In prior wars, there have been a level of an attempt of manufacturing consent. It's a disgusting sort of thing to be witnessing, and an even more indescribable experience to be Iranian and watch your president say that it's an honor for him to kill Iranians. It really, it's difficult to process. And I, that's why I think I'm struggling to put this into words, because it really is on such a deep level, just horrific.
Well, staying on this topic of rhetoric, we've seen a lot of messaging from Netanyahu and from Trump about how this war is to free the Iranian people from an oppressive regime. We just heard more of that rhetoric today with the reported assassination of Ali Larijani. And we're speaking on Tuesday. We've seen them also specifically talk about Iranian women and freeing Iranian women. You've spoken in the past about this type of rhetoric. What would you say about this framing?
There's so much to say about this framing. I mean, I think for starters, this is so 2002. This is so we're going to bomb the hell out of women to save them. We're going to bring freedom to Afghan women by actually bombing their schools and the roads they take to their schools. I think this has been well documented that this is really tried and failed strategy in terms of manufacturing consent for war. I think at this point, every sort of top member of Trump's team is throwing out different excuses. This happens to be one that I think many people in diaspora also attach to, which I think allows it to get a little bit of support because there is very real repression in Iran against women. And at the same time, and I think that what is devastating about this war is that one of many things is that there has been also major social movements for decades in Iran, primarily led by women. And I think the Women Life Freedom movement in 2022 is a beautiful example. And people in Iran and friends of mine in Iran who are organizers on the ground have mentioned that this is setting back the entire movement for decades. So I think the actual lived realities of Iranian women on the ground will not be improving by American and Israeli bombs. If anything, they are underneath them. And I think the fact that the Minab school was hit and the first victims of this war were young girls, I think that specifically should be a shattering of any sort of language that this war is to support women when they are literally the first casualties of this war and will continue to be the casualties of this war. But on top of that, like I mentioned, this is only going to put back the decades-long struggles within Iran and revolutionary movements within Iran that have been primarily led by women, given that this is just fodder for the Iranian government to crack down further on dissent within Iran.
That point you raised, that hypocrisy that some are finding with this, I saw it all over Twitter, X, on social media. I want to share just a couple of them. Ash, MAGA, protect and free the women of Iran. Also MAGA, bombs and kills 150 elementary school girls on day one. Muhammad writes, U.S. wanted to liberate women in Iran, and so they bombed the school in Iran that killed 175 girls and women. It's...
And can I add... Sorry.
Please do.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I will add is that the United States and Israel also have no moral superiority to claim that they are here to support Iranian women. Literally, this government in the United States is run by an Epstein class. Israel is a safe haven for pedophiles. There is no world in which the United States and Israel has any moral authority to act on behalf of women, both within their own country or outside of the country. And so I think that we also, when we talk about regime change, that needs to start at home. We are in the middle of actually trying to demand that files are released from the Epstein case that incriminate and likely, or have incriminated and will continue to incriminate likely Donald Trump as the head of the state. This is an important context that also is happening at the same time of this war. And I think that's so important to be able to have as part of this conversation.
Hoda, that's why we bring you on, for that context. We have talked about accountability or lack thereof in this conversation from within the U.S. government. We've seen the outrage. I shared it on Twitter. I see yours. We've seen the outrage from many Americans about the attack and subsequent hits and strikes across Iran. What do you think your community, your neighbors, our fellow Americans in this country, what are we meant to do to hold the U.S. accountable? Is it possible?
I think that's a really, really great question. And I love that the question is framed as how do we hold the government accountable, and not how does it hold itself accountable. And I think that we have really felt, I think many of us, including myself, sometimes take for granted that like this government claims to have a level of checks and balances. This government claims to have mechanisms to hold itself accountable. There are treaties that we've signed, such as the Geneva Convention, that kind of designate such actions as the blatant targeting of civilians unlawful, the destruction of civilian infrastructure unlawful. And yet when it comes to accountability, what happens? How is there any accountability for the girls that were killed at Minab? How is there any accountability for the sanctions that have been placed against Iran for years that have also led to a devastation of Iranian people, the sanctions across the world that have led to millions of deaths? Where's the accountability for all of this? And I think what's also particularly important is because we haven't had that level of real accountability in the United States for prior wars, such as Iraq, Afghanistan, drone strikes in Yemen, Somalia, that the same mechanisms that are pushing for and benefited the war profiteers of those wars continue to push for and benefit monetarily from this war against Iran. And so I think accountability looks like an actual structural shift in how we understand our relationship with the world, as well as all of the entities that make up the war machine that have pushed us toward endless war after endless war and have sucked up all of our resources to kill people abroad. And I think that looks like us as individuals recognizing that we actually have individual collective power, and that our state and all these companies and all these, big powers that are creating this war are also compilations of people. And so I think if we can also recognize that we together can create chokeholds for the flow of weapons. We together can stop weapons being flown out of the Oakland airport. We together can actually, those of us working in the tech industry, can build on our worker power to have a level of agency in stopping the use of AI for war and AI-powered death machines. I think all of this is actually made by people, and we forget that sometimes when we talk about the state. We talk about war profiteers. But we, the government is nothing without all of us being a part of and consenting to allow things to go business as usual. And so I think we have to recognize that actually we do hold more power than the government allows us to feel that way. And as part of this, I think the second part also is that a challenge for why there has been failures of accountability, or why we see things like the Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust, where we say nothing like this should ever happen again. And yet we see it happening again and again, is because the ideas and structures are never put on trial. Individuals who press buttons are placed on trial. But we've never had a reckoning on a global scale with white supremacy. We've never had a reckoning on a global scale with fascism and Nazism. This is a dangerous, violent ideology that we have to be able to challenge on a systematized scale as collectives of people, because that really is the only way.
That was a bar. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I want to end. I mean, you landed that plane beautifully, but at the risk of making you get a little emotional here, I have to ask as my final question, because I'm thinking while we're having this conversation, I can't help but think of your first appearance on The Take, which was to talk about our garment workers collective in Chicago. And that was about taking accountability in a different way for the clothes we wear and for the labor that it takes to make those clothes. And now we're here having this conversation about U.S. accountability for an attack on a children's school. Your work has always meant splitting your attention, at least geographically, between the U.S. and Iran. And so I wonder if you could let people in on how you're doing at this moment, merging those two worlds while living through this.
I feel like I have gone through every human emotion possible, known, unknown, in the past I don't even know when the war broke out at this point. You could tell me it was a year ago and I would believe you. I feel like I have actually aged probably a year a day. And so I really struggle to articulate a cohesive way of how I'm feeling, because there are thousands of ways in which I'm feeling that are also fighting against each other. I think I feel also just I think the fact also that like many of us have also, as Iranians, been watching. Also, the Iranian government just in January had killed thousands of its own people, and this was extremely devastating thing to be watching from diaspora under the shroud of sort of an internet blackout. I'm infuriated and angered by the way that we collectively have allowed this war to continue business as usual, and also recognize that we're all so exhausted from trying to do anything at all to respond to or stop a genocide that has been unfolding on our screen for years. I think all of these things are very real, and I think we are supposed to feel paralyzed in this moment by the sheer overwhelm of the situation. And I do. And I hate to admit that I do. And at the same time, I recognize that like I can't. And so I think that it is just a constant struggle every single day. All I want to do is cry and try and just stare at my phone and refresh until I hear from somebody, which is not every day. Not just watch Al Jazeera all day on my television, but just like, what can I do? Like, what is one thing I can do? What is one person I can call? And I think it is, a feeling unlike I have ever had, and I would never wish this on anybody. And I think, unfortunately, far too many of us now have experienced this feeling. And I know that more and more will also, unfortunately, know exactly what I'm talking about if we do not come together to end U.S. complicity in Israeli wars and this war against Iran.
Yeah. Hoda Katebi, thank you so much for sharing this and letting us in. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.